A very good evening to all of you, and welcome to the session on mergers and amalgamation. As you would note, mergers and amalgamation, very popularly referred to as M&A, is something which is not very new to us. It is something which is very popular concept, or you can say abbreviation, which now and then you must be utilizing. And in business laws, it has got a particular connotation, or I must say a particular perspective. And today's session, we are going to cover this particular concept, M&A. Now, when I say M&A, let us look at some trends. And this is sourced from Grant Thornton, and you can see this particular trend. And this slide basically tells you about the different types of M&As which has happened in terms of volume, in terms of value. And if you look at when I say volume, it is talking about the number of M&As. And when I say value, it is talking about the amount which was involved in this M&A, mergers and amalgamation. And you can see the figures. If you compare the figures of 2017 to 2019, there is quite an interesting data which comes here. I will draw your attention to domestic. See domestic. You will find in 2017 there were 24 M&As which happened, and comparatively the value of that M&A was $503 million. And if you compare the same M&A in 2019, there were 13 M&A which happened, and however the volume was $609 million. So you can see the volume has increased. However, the number of M&As have decreased. What does it show? It basically shows that there are big ticket mergers which have happened here, right? And there is also, you can see the cross-border mergers which has happened, and there are certain mergers and internal restructuring. So there is another word which is very common to all of us, is restructuring. So you must have often heard about this word, corporate restructuring. So this corporate restructuring is quite a interesting phenomenon, and I must tell you a concept, and it includes a number of aspects, a number of dimensions to it. So we will talk about that in a while. And there is completely a different space of practice in corporate law, and that is referred to as private equity. And this private equity is basically raising the capital by way of a private placement. And you can see there is a separate area of practice on private equity. So these are the different terminologies which are used, and you can see the M&A trend which I am talking about. And in terms of, if you see the top 3 deals which had happened, and this is the data somewhere around August 2019, you can see these are some of the important ones, Adani, Reliance, and Airwater. This was just to set the context that how important this M&A trend is. And if you look at this particular aspect of M&A trend and then move forward as to what is the aim and objective of today's session, if you look at today's scope of presentation is very limited. So it is very impossible for us to cover everything under M&A in 1 hour session. However, what I am trying to do here is giving you a broader perspective, and in fact providing you open threads on different elements in the concept of M&A, so that subsequently you can catch those particular threads and open up those areas for yourself and try to go deeper into each of these threads. So primarily the objective of today's session would be to cover 3 areas. The first one would be to understand the concept of M&A, that is mergers and amalgamation. And when I say this, I am referring to Companies Act specifically, because all these particular rules and regulation for corporate law, the parent legislation is Companies Act 2013. And then we will try to understand what is the concept of corporate restructuring broadly, not in greater detail, but generally we will try to understand what does this corporate restructuring means. And then we will also talk about the role of National Company Law Tribunal and SEBI in M&A, right? So this is what we will try to do in scope of presentation. If I move further and look at the business restructuring perspective, if you see business restructuring, then here you have to also have a look at portfolio and asset restructuring and capital restructuring. These are the two primary restructuring exercises which is the bifurcation of restructuring. There you will see, when you talk about corporate capital restructuring, this is basically referring to the concept of debt restructuring, investment pattern, FDI participation. So it all relates to the financial aspect of it, more of infusion of a capital and utilization of that particular capital. But when you are talking about portfolio and asset restructuring, it is more about involving into the core business. It is more about participation into the organization or the entity. And that is where comes the further bifurcations, which you can see downwards. And these are mergers and amalgamation, acquisitions, joint ventures, and divestitures, which is also popularly referred to as demergers. So let me now tell you a bit about this demergers. And if you have a look at this concept of demergers, there are terms like spin-offs, splits, and these are the types of demergers. So what happens in this is basically in a spin-off, one business unit may be given an independent entity and their profits would be done separately. Like for example, if I talk about in a computer space or in a say food and beverages industry, one of the product is doing very well. So the company decides that let us carve out or take away this particular product separately and open up in a company. So that will be a spin-off. Similarly, if you talk about splits, it will be basically partitioning the company into two separate units. In equity carve-out, basically what happens is one of the subsidiaries of a company may be given an independent existence, and maybe its share is open for public, and then they purchase that particular share. So this is some kind of a demerger exercise wherein you are basically from the larger organization, you are carving out the smaller organizations or smaller entities for number of purposes. It can be efficiency, it can be diversification, it can be regulation, it can be tax benefits, it can be anything. So there can be a number of reasons for that. Other than that, there are two modalities like joint ventures and acquisitions. So joint ventures is again an mechanism of restructuring wherein two entities come together and they would like to form a new company maybe, or they are governed by a partnership, they are governed by a joint venture agreement wherein they want to form a consortium for a particular project. So joint venture is completely a different law and regulation which will be there. Other than that, there is also something which is referred to as acquisitions. Now, acquisitions as a restructuring exercise has gained prominence, and particularly in when we talk about securities and SEBI, this acquisition part is something which is governed by a specific regulation now under SEBI, and that is called SAST regulations, Substantial Acquisition and Takeover Code. So this is basically the acquisition part of restructuring exercise. And the mergers and amalgamation is one part which we are basically going to focus today, and that is what is the mandate of today's session. We are focusing on mergers and amalgamation. Now, mergers and amalgamation, when you talk about what does merger and amalgamation mean? Now, when I look at definitions, whenever we want to understand in law anything, we basically go ahead with mergers. We go ahead with the definition clause first, and we try to find out whether there is a definition or not. So if you look at the definition perspective, there is no definition of mergers and amalgamation under the Companies Act. So you don't find a definition. However, in the Companies Act 2013, you can gauge understanding about merger which is more clearer than 1956 law. And what does it indicate? It indicates the merger is a combination of two or more entities into one. And it says the desired effect of being not just the accumulation of assets and liabilities of the distinct entity, but organization of such entity into one business. So this is what is the objective, or you can say the definition of merger under the Companies Act. Not a formal definition, but you can call out this definition when you read the provision under the Companies Act relating to merger and amalgamation. If you read amalgamation, amalgamation is again not defined under the Companies Act. However, we all look at the Income Tax Act to try and find out as to what is the definition of amalgamation. And there the definition of amalgamation goes like this. It says the merger of one or more companies with another company, or the merger of two or more companies to form one company. So if you look at these two definitions, there is a bit of a divergence over here in terms of the definition. The amalgamation definition is a bit broader definition, or it is a more inclusive definition wherein you can include a number of things, and rightly so. If you go into the definition under the Income Tax Act, section 21B, you will find that the amalgamation is basically different circumstances under which a tax benefit is given at the time of merger, or two companies coming together, or one company merging into another company. So definition of mergers and amalgamation as such, you can look at, refers to basically a combination. Now, I have underlined the word combination over here because there is another legislation which you people must be aware of, is called Competition Act. And in Competition Act, they don't use the term mergers and amalgamation, they use the term combination, approval of combinations. And the combination includes, in fact, three terms if you look at under the Competition Act. And the first term talks about acquisition. Then there is acquisition of control. And the third one speaks about M&A, mergers and amalgamation, that is section 5 subclause C. And in that M&A, it is basically referring to nothing but the Companies Act 2013. And that is why today we are going to focus on Companies Act 2013 as far as mergers and amalgamation is concerned. However, in terms of technicalities of mergers and amalgamation, you will find that there are different types of mergers and amalgamation. But before I go into the details of this mergers and amalgamation types, these types are on the basis of the necessity of mergers and amalgamation. So why does merger and amalgamation happen? So if you go for business studies, if you try to understand from the business perspective, a strategy perspective, mergers and amalgamation is a part of a strategy of the organization. So they would try to acquire, they would try to, like for example, let us talk about horizontal mergers. When you say horizontal mergers, this is basically a strategy to eliminate a competitor. And that is why you will find that the horizontal mergers are dealt with very seriously by the Competition Commission. So horizontal mergers are basically mergers between similar kinds of entities. Like if they are AC manufacturers, all AC manufacturers, if they come together and they merge, that will be horizontal merger, which will be subject to analysis. When we talk about vertical mergers, this is basically under the vertical chain, and that is vertical supply chain I am talking about. And it can be like, for example, if there is a car manufacturers, these original equipment manufacturers who supply maybe the carburetor of a car, or maybe the seat of a car or tire of a car, that kind of a merger, if it's there between these two companies, would be a vertical merger. Now, there are certain co-generic mergers also. Like if suppose we are into, manufacturing of a printer, and that particular company, merges with a company which manufactures or is in the production of printer ink. Maybe that is a co-generic merger. But when you talk about conglomerate merger, this is completely between two different set of businesses. So if a truck company, merges with a juice manufacturing company, probably that is a conglomerate merger, because these two businesses doesn't have any relationship as such. There are two other types of mergers which are also referred to as cash out merger. So basically this is a mechanism wherein a company completely buys out the shareholders, and that is kind of called cash out merger. a bit of a technical term. And then there is something which is referred to as triangular merger, where there are three entities involved. So what happens in this case is the parent company, like if I have a wholly owned subsidiary, I don't merge a target along with me, but with my wholly owned subsidiary. So in fact, I am funding that particular transaction and bringing that target company under my fold, but through my wholly owned subsidiary. So this is how are the different types of merger. Now, how do you decide which type of merger a company will go is a strategic decision. And that is what I said, that business plays a very big role in all these merger decisions, and it affects a number of players or number of stakeholders. That is where I come, and let us move to the other portion of it. And as I told you before, that we have got the Companies Act 2013, which deals with this particular provision. And if you have a look at the Act 1956 Act and 2013 Act, you will find that in the 1956 Act, it was Chapter 5 which dealt with this provision of mergers and amalgamation. In 2013 Act, it is Chapter 15. So in terms of development in the chapters, there is a development of 10 chapters. It has gone a bit farther in terms of chapters. However, if you will look at the sections, it has gone down. So from 396A, it has gone to 230, 240, right? So this is what is the situation which has happened. And if I take you to the, give me a minute, give me a second. I think there is a kid on the block. So if you have a look at this, Chapter 5 and Chapter 15, and then we have got the chapter name of the chapter. So if you look at the name of the topic, you will find that there are arbitrations, compromises, arrangements, and reconstruction. This is the name which is given to the chapter under the 1956 Act. And if you see the 2013 Act, the chapter name is constricted. In fact, the word arbitrations have been dropped. So what does it mean? It means that the focus of the chapter or the mergers and amalgamation provisions have moved more towards promoting or facilitating mergers and amalgamation rather than putting restriction or having a restrictive approach towards that. In terms of authority who used to approve the mergers and amalgamation, you will find that there is a number of change which has also happened here. And here you will see in terms of authority, previously we used to have High Court, which used to approve the scheme under the Company Code Rules 1959. And now it is basically the National Company Law Tribunal. I am sure you all are aware about National Company Law Tribunal. So the National Company Law Tribunal approves the merger and scheme. And what is the idea and objective of having National Company Law Tribunal is exclusive body, exclusive tribunal, which has got a mix of judicial and non-judicial members. And they together actually decide on the technical matters. And mergers and amalgamation being technical matters, it was thought that body like NCLT would be able to do more justice in the mergers and amalgamation approval situation. And to this effect, we have got regular rules that is called the Companies, Compromises, Arrangements and Amalgamation Rules 2016, which is effective from 15 December 2016. And that is the date when actually the Companies Act 2013 merger provisions got notified. And I don't know how many of you are aware about it, but we have got notification, and that date of the notification is 7th of December. It is also popularly referred to as 7th December notification, which by which the NCLT got the approval, or you can say power, to look into the merger cases. So let me take you further, and if you talk about the key strategies of a M&A process, you will find that the key strategy of the M&A process is basically there are three phases to a merger transaction, M&A transaction. And the first phase is called pre-transaction. The second one is post-transaction. And the third one is called execution process. So this is how this is dealt with. So we have got these three types, or three phases, or three processes. Now, if you have a look at the provisions, I will just take you to the slide. And if you have a look at this, you will see there are three phases. The first one is pre-transaction, the execution process, and post-transaction. So ideally, the merger doesn't stop, by just having the transaction under the company law. In fact, in the pre-transaction, there is a lot of strategy which works. And just now I spoke about the business perspective of it. So there is a corporate strategy, there is a M&A strategy, and then you also have a target identification kind of a thing which happens. So here, basically, this is called pre-due diligence as well, wherein you are doing a lot of work to understand that what would be the M&A strategy for you. And then comes the execution process. And in execution process, there are four major elements which is there. And one of the first major element is due diligence. So you do a due diligence first. That is your legal analysis, that what would be the outcome of this merger, how this will help the organization. And then you talk about negotiation. So you negotiate with the parties, the target company or the two companies which are merging, and you'll have a look at it. And then you design the structuring, what kind of a structuring it would be. Whether you are going to have acquisition, whether you are going to have share swap, or you are having some other mechanism which that is technicalities of that restructuring, which we saw in that other slide, is discussed over there and designed over there. And then you talk about an important element that is called valuation and synergy. So this valuation exercise is a very, very important exercise in mergers and amalgamation. And in mergers and amalgamation scheme, the High Court used to look at this particular valuation and this share exchange ratio. All those things used to be looked at by the High Courts. And valuation and the synergies becomes a very important part for approving a scheme, right? And then we have the post-transaction. And in the post-transaction, once the transaction is complete, you have to also look for the launch. Like if you are having a big mergers and amalgamation, you must have seen the launch in the newspapers, or in fact, they will be making a lot of announcements that this merger has happened. And then there is a post-merger management, which is very important. And that actually is handling the cultural shocks, because if you are merging with an organization, imagine Tata Jaguar merger or maybe Cadbury Kraft merger. In all these particular cases, cultural shock and handling the employees, existing employees of both the organization becomes very important. And that is where comes post-merger management. There will be books, there will be accountants, different accountants. So all these things needs to be done. And then comes capacity building, which is an important element to actually find out as to how there will be, they will be roped in or brought into the same philosophy of the merged organization. So this is an overall stages of M&A, and it is said success of these transactions depends on success at every stage. So every stage in this whole process is very important for a mergers and amalgamation process. Now, if I take and move further, and I would expect you can type your questions in between. So I will be happy to address them while I go. If I talk about one important section, which becomes very, very important, that is section 230 subclause 5. If you look at this particular section, it talks about power to compromise or make arrangements with creditors and members. So what we are talking about here is basically under the Companies Act 2013, this is a provision which has been added, which requires that the notice of any scheme or amalgamation or merger, along with all the documents which has been prescribed, and these prescribed documents include the scheme, the stakeholders, what is the amount which is involved, all those things are there, which are prescribed under the rules, which we mentioned just before. And this needs to be sent to the following entities. Now I'll take them one by one. The first one is central government. So if you look at the information which requires to be given to the central government, here central government basically means that it is, this is here central government means regional directors. So here we are having regional directors, and these regional directors there are 7 regional directors you will find, and these regional directors are at different locations, Bombay, Delhi, Shillong, like this. And they have been empowered or given the delegated power under the Companies Act to act on behalf of the central government. There is a notification to this effect. So an NCLT, which is within a particular jurisdiction exercising this aspect, will be actually looking at the notice which has been coming under section 235 for any inconsistency or any observation, because regional director will have all information about a company which is operating in that area. Then it is important to seek income tax authorities. So in many of the transactions, you will find that the companies may be having a tax obligation or tax requirement. There, the income tax authorities need to be informed. Then there is a requirement to inform Reserve Bank of India as well. So if there is any foreign currency involved or any cross-border merger involved, there RBI needs to be informed. Then we will also have information going to Securities and Exchange Board of India, that is SEBI. And why SEBI? Because of the companies which may be listed. So if there is a listed company or is listed on stock exchanges, then there it is very important to follow the SEBI takeover code. So in a while, I'll talk about that SEBI in a while. Other than that, the registrar of companies, definitely he needs to be informed, and respective stock exchanges. So even the information goes to the stock exchanges. The official liquidator, if it is company is under liquidation or such kind of a situation is there, then it will go to official liquidator. Now you all know about insolvency bankruptcy court, so it will go to the insolvency professional who acts as a official liquidator. And then Competition Commission of India in cases where it is required, and you may be aware that all combinations are not subject to review by Competition Commission of India. There are certain combination which goes beyond a particular threshold have to be referred to Competition Commission of India. And any other sectoral regulator, like for example, if it is an insurance company, it will go to IRDA. If it is a telecom company, it will go to TRAI. So all these notices go from NCLT to them, these bodies, asking for any input or any objection, anything which they want within 30 days. And if they don't give any information, that is considered that they have provided the information or their things. Now here there is a bit of a catch that if you look at CCI combination regulation, it provides for 210 days for approval. So does it mean that within 30 days, if CCI has not informed, then CCI approval is done? No. So that doesn't happen. So statutorily, the commission would take cognizance of this and then maybe inform the NCLT that yes, we are looking into this particular matter. So this is something which happens, and CCI also has a timeline of 30 days for prima facie opinion on a case. So accordingly, it gives a prima facie opinion within that period. If it requires detailed investigation, it goes into that detailed investigation. So what is the objective of informing all these authorities? If you look at the previous regime, when High Court used to look into this matter, many of the bodies would not know about that particular merger or that scheme. And later on, there will be a lot of litigations and a lot of other aspects. So a comprehensive mechanism is now available under the Companies Act so that everybody is informed about the merger. And if somebody has to object, somebody has something to say, they can tell that within the time limit prescribed, and the things can be sorted at the beginning rather than, you know, blowing it at a later stage when merger has already advanced. Now, if you look at the role of SEBI, as I told you that I will be covering this particular aspect in a while, SEBI has a huge role to play. And how SEBI has a role to play? SEBI has a role to play in a sense that SEBI regulates all companies which are listed on stock exchanges. That is, companies which are, you know, listing their shares, trading in their shares. Those companies are subject to SEBI regulation. So in addition to the Companies Act M&A provision, they would be subject to the listing obligation rules. This is popularly referred to as listing regulations, and SEBI takeover code. So when there is an acquisition or acquiring of shares of a company, then in that situation, takeover code comes into picture. Other than that, since M&A transaction involves a huge amount of insider information, because, you know, it depends in a market, if a news goes about M&A, it affects a lot as far as share prices of the companies concerned are concerned. So in that particular count, what it is stating is basically that you have to keep this information, the information of a decision in a board to do M&A is an important decision, and that decision needs to be kept confidential as per the prohibition of insider trading regulations, and insider trading regulations also comes into picture. So I'm not going into the details of this because there is a completely separate session on takeover code which requires to be looked at, and one has to go into this regulation in detail because it is a detailed regulation. So that is not scope of the presentation today. We may talk about it maybe in the next presentation. If you look at the Companies Act, it also talks about cross-border merger. This is a new concept which has been introduced under the Companies Act 2013. If you look at 1956 law, the cross-border merger was only one way. Now, the cross-border merger is both ways. So previously, the foreign company can only be the transferor to the Indian company, and Indian company can only be the transferee company, but now it can go both ways. And this has now been notified by the central government. So there is a regulation, cross-border merger regulation by RBI under the FEMA, because it is a foreign exchange is involved. So Foreign Exchange Management Act, and that is how RBI as a regulator steps in. So you saw there are different regulators which play an important role as far as M&A is concerned. So it is not that easy exercise. And that is why it is considered as a very important area of practice in all major law firms, you know, M&A practice. So FEMA angle would be involved when there is any foreign company merging with Indian company or Indian company merging with foreign company. So this is cross-border merger. Now this has been fully notified, and I think 20th March 2018, this provision got notified, and it is fully functional now. Now, if you look at another important dimension under this Companies Act 2013, is it also talks about fast-track mergers. So what it has said that there may be certain mergers which does not require a detailed and elaborate analysis by NCLT. And those mergers could be, if there is a merger between two small companies, you would note that under the Companies Act 2013, they have given a definition of small companies. And these small companies are on the basis of their threshold, like I think it is 50 lakh rupees some turnover, or 5 crore rupees turnover, something like that. A definition is given in the Companies Act. I am not sure of exactly of the threshold. And other than that, you will see there are fast-track merger would not involve any NCLT approval. Here, basically, the board of directors would approve, and the notice would be given to the registrar of companies. And in case if there is an official liquidator, there will be an objection. So most of the cases you will find this kind of a merger happening in insolvency proceedings, or maybe when there is a merger between holding and wholly owned subsidiaries. And here it is important that there is a threshold approval of at least 90% of the shareholders. So that kind of a embargo or restriction is there in this. If I take you further and we try to understand the role of NCLT in this particular case. So here you will see that we are having two important cases under the 1956 Act, which is very important, and that is Hindustan Lever Employees Union versus Hindustan Lever Limited. This was a case which was decided by Supreme Court. And it basically said that, whilst high courts are sanctioning the claims of merger, they don't have to go into the mathematical accuracy. So it is not the job of the high court to look into the scheme and details of it. And they don't have to, be satisfied as an arithmetical test. So they will do a broad, fair play test, which is required. Similarly, in Mihir Mafatlal's case, which is a very popular case as far as M&A is concerned, you will not sit in a judgment over an informed view of the concerned parties. So it is said that business judgment which the parties have arrived at should not be normally disturbed. So what is the broad contours of the jurisdiction of the High Court? In that, if you will look at, it has been said that it is basically monitoring compliance with requisite statutory procedures. So there are statutory procedures given under the Companies Act. If someone doesn't follow that, like for example, it talks about a special resolution in the board. If someone has not passed that special resolution and they have just given the decision of the merger, maybe that is a subject to a question under the Companies Act. Similarly, ensuring that scheme is just, fair and reasonable. Now, these words just, fair and reasonable is quite difficult to define, and that is where jurisprudence lies. From the point of view of a prudent person, again, this prudent person, it is difficult to find this prudent person, and that is why there is a number of jurisprudence. Through case laws, you find this prudent person, that how a normal businessman would have behaved. And then taking a commercial decision and ensuring that scheme is not contrary to law and public policy. Now, when you say this law and public policy, there is an important concept that is called public interest. So this public interest is played around. So if you will look at the role of NCLT presently, now a couple of literature you will find and read that it was contemplated when the jurisdiction from High Court went to NCLT. It was contemplated that NCLT will have lesser intervention in these particular cases, and it will be more faster because they have got technical members, they have got judicial members. But unfortunately, in some of the literature which I was reading, I was finding that NCLT has been more interventionist in these particular cases and probably have applied more mind into some of the cases, which which was not maybe the intention behind, and that is what Supreme Court has said in one of the cases. So this is how role of NCLT is crafted. There are 15 locations in which NCLT is located, and all these particular matters now go for approval to the NCLT. Generally, you won't find NCLT intervening into this particular business mathematical accuracy and decision. But again, as you note, there is a very thin line of understanding that who is a prudent person, what would be the law and public policy, what is fair and reasonable. So definitely many a times, if you understand finance, like for example, if a member who specializes in finance and he is sitting on an NCLT bench, maybe he will have opinion over some calculations which is there. And now it is a kind of a double-edged sword. So you cannot tell that the member should not exercise this particular judgment. Why he is sitting there then? But at the same time, he will not replace the board's decision, because it is ultimately the company and the board, the separate legal entity, which is looking at this aspect. So there is a need of a balance kind of a thing over here, and that is what the different literature talks about. An interesting piece here in this slide for you all to look into the details of these cases and try to see what NCLT has in store in different decisions for you all on mergers and amalgamation particularly. Now, if you talk about mergers and amalgamation, and this is probably my last slide, M&A regulations, why are we talking about? We are talking about M&A regulations because this infuses transparency. Not only this, it also ensures that there is a disclosure of effect of compromise, because it is not only the board of directors which are concerned, not only the majority shareholders, but there is also the minority shareholders, there are employees, there are different creditors. So everybody's stake or everybody's concern has been addressed in an M&A transaction is the job of the NCLT to ensure. And that is why it is said that whether the M&A is fair and reasonable or not has to be considered by the the NCLT. And it also ensures fairness, and it basically is also aimed towards, and if you see the Companies Act 2013, you will find that it is also aimed towards overcoming unnecessary resistance. Unnecessary resistance from whom? The minority shareholder. So you will find under section 236 of the Companies Act, there is something which is referred to as squeeze out provisions. What is this squeeze out provisions? These squeeze out provisions are basically, allowing the company to purchase 10% of the shares. Like if 90% of the people agree and 10% of the people are not agreeing to a buyout, then in that situation, company has a right to compulsorily purchase that particular share by offering a fair price. So this is something which is important for the mergers and amalgamation regulations to be fair toward the business as well. So you will see a lot of resistance which used to be there under the Companies Act 1956, and a number of litigation following which is now curtailed because of this squeeze out provision. With this, these are some of the references, and I would like to take questions now, and let me see what are the questions. So if I see here, okay, this is a question which is specifically which relates to the valuation of assets in case of demerger. And if you look at, there are now, if you would look at under the Companies Act, there is a detailed valuation rules which is there. There is a separate professionals which are valuation professionals. So these people do it. It is in fact technical aspect which you have asked, Priyanka. And here, you need to refer to the valuation rules. So there are specific set of rules for plants and machinery, shares. So accordingly, those rules are followed for deciding the valuation of these, either in demerger or merger. So I believe that helps you the answer. If I talk about another question, it says, once the High Court or NCLT has approved a scheme or arrangement because it was passed by majority members, whether the creditor from minority can challenge the approval scheme in appeal. If they, then what grounds? Yeah, I think this I have already answered. There is a squeeze out provisions, not much for the minority. If 90% of the people agree, eventually these 10% have to agree to it. So this is what is the situation. Okay. If the directors and board of directors have created fraud, then that is a separate angle altogether. Suppose a matter goes into, if they have committed fraud or something, people will always have remedy under operation and mismanagement. So they can always file a claim and concern under the operation mismanagement provisions. So this is what is the situation. So there is an interesting document created by Nishit Desai Associates, and this is a 2016 document, but relevant. It talks about mergers and acquisition in India. Nishit Desai is very known for their research, so you can have a look at this document, which gives you references. And then there are two presentations which I utilized for this, making this presentation, and you can search on web, you will get these presentations over there, or you can go to these particular websites, Vaish Law Associates and AKN Partners. There you will find the literature. So with this, I think I have completed my presentation, and if you have any further questions, feel free to ask. Thank you for your patient hearing. It was wonderful speaking to all of you.